Well, friends, here we go again. A federal appeals court just ordered the Trump administration to return another man to the U.S. that they unconstitutionally deported to El Salvador. You know, no one can ever accuse the Trump administration of learning from their mistakes. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, first, it was Abrego Garcia, unconstitutionally deported to El Salvador, and federal judges, trial court judge, appeals court judge, and Supreme Court justices ordered the Trump administration to return Abrego Garcia to the United States. And the Trump administration did, but of course, they did it in the shadiest way possible by trumping up some criminal charges against Abrego Garcia, criminal charges that now look like they may be falling apart. Well, now there is a second individual. An appeals court just ordered the Trump administration to return someone else that the administration unlawfully, unconstitutionally deported to El Salvador. This time, it's an individual named Jordin Melgar-Salmaron. And this one, friends, has a little bit of a due process twist. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but first, let's take on the new reporting. This from Politico. Headline, another man who was deported in violation of court order must be returned to the U.S. Court rules. And that article begins, the Trump administration must try to bring back to the U.S. another man who was deported to El Salvador in violation of a court order, a federal appeals court ruled Tuesday. It's the fourth time since March that federal courts have ordered the administration to return immigrants who were deemed illegally or improperly or unconstitutionally deported. Officials must begin seeking the return of Jordin Melgar-Salmaron, who was sent to his native country on May 7, as soon as possible, a three-judge panel of the New York-based Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled. Justice Department officials acknowledged last month that Melgar-Salmaron's deportation violated an earlier directive from the Second Circuit. A Department DOJ lawyer blamed a confluence of administrative errors. Isn't that a lovely euphemism for defying court orders and trampling somebody's constitutional rights? A confluence of administrative errors. Yes, my editorial edition. They blamed the confluence of administrative errors, including missed emails and an inaccurate roster of passengers on the May 7 deportation flight. But the Department of Homeland Security contradicted that assessment in a public statement, saying there was no error, and accusing Melgar-Salmaron of belonging to the violent MS-13 gang. Where have we heard this bullshit before? They violate the constitutional due process rights of somebody, blatantly so, intentionally, even gleefully. And then they say, well, person was a dangerous MS-13 gang member. You know, friends, can I tell you something I never did as a career prosecutor? I never said, you know, this guy that I'm prosecuting is a dangerous gang member, so fuck his constitutional rights. But that's the approach of the Trump administration. Back to the reporting. Melgar-Salmaron's situation resembles the cases of three other men whose hurried deportations prompted strong pushback from courts. All allegedly entered the U.S. without authorization, but had protections from being immediately deported. Two of the men, Kilmar Abrego Garcia and Daniel Lozano Camargo, were sent to El Salvador on March 15th. Abrego Garcia's deportation violated a binding 2019 order from an immigration judge who had barred the government, the Trump administration, from sending him to El Salvador because he faced a risk of violence there. Lozano Camargo's deportation violated a binding court settlement related to certain undocumented immigrants who arrived in the U.S. as minors. And another man, identified in court papers only as OCG, was ordered returned from overseas by a federal judge in Massachusetts after administration officials acknowledged that they had no evidence he was offered a credible fear assessment before he was deported to Mexico. Authorities are supposed to conduct such assessments to ensure they are complying with legal requirements not to deport people to countries where they have a credible fear of torture or persecution. The administration arranged for the return of OCG earlier this month and brought back Abrego to face criminal immigrant smuggling charges. A recent update from the Department of Homeland Security indicated that discussions with El Salvador related to Lozano Camargo's return are continuing. Melgar-Salmaron, who spent years living in Virginia, had been in immigration detention since 2022 until his deportation last month. Why? Because he was convicted of possessing an unregistered shotgun, and he had served a sentence in that case. After his prison sentence ended, Melgar-Salmaron was detained by immigration authorities while deportation proceedings against him were ongoing. The Justice Department asked the appeals court to expedite Melgar-Salmaron's case and indicated that it wanted to deport him by May 9 at the latest, but, and here's the important part, friends, but the DOJ assured the court that no deportation would take place before May 8. On the morning of May 7, a three-judge panel of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals ordered the government to keep Melgar-Salmaron in the United States while he pursued claims about fear of torture in his home country. But about 30 minutes later, Melgar-Salmaron was on a deportation flight. Now, friends, this case has something of a deportation twist. And this case also raises an issue that I think sometimes gets lost in these deportation discussions we've been having. And that is, obviously, some people should be deported. I don't think anybody is arguing that nobody should be deported. If somebody comes here illegally, they violate the laws of the United States, they are prosecuted, they are convicted, they serve a jail term, a prison term. What ordinarily happens is, at the completion of their prison term, they're deported, although not until after they've had their due process rights satisfied of notice and opportunity to be heard regarding their deportation. Once their criminal case and their criminal sentence is over, they still get notice that they're going to be deported and an opportunity to be heard in court with the assistance of counsel and perhaps argue that they shouldn't be deported. But, you know, there are plenty of folks who should be deported because that's sort of the way the laws of our country, our criminal laws and our immigration laws, are set up. But here is the deportation twist in this case. So after someone has come here illegally, been criminally prosecuted and convicted, served a prison term, and had their due process rights of notice and opportunity to be heard satisfied, and an immigration judge orders them deported, there is another due process right that they have under the law. They have a right to a reasonable fear hearing and determination. What does that involve? Well, if there is evidence that if we deport somebody to a particular country, they are at imminent risk of torture, persecution, or murder, then they may have a reasonable fear and they may ask the court not to allow the United States government to deport them to that country, deport them to another country. That's a reasonable fear hearing. That's part of their due process rights. So that's why this case has a bit of a deportation twist, because the Trump administration says not to worry. They tell the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, we will not be deporting this individual before May 8th. On the morning of May 7th, accordingly, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals entered an order, an injunction saying you may not deport this person. Should have been fine, right? Because DOJ assured the court they wouldn't act until the 8th. But then on the morning of the 7th, they stuck him on a plane and deported him to the country where he had a reasonable fear of torture, persecution, or murder. So they violated the court order. They violated the due process rights of the individual. They violated the Constitution. And the court ordered this person to be returned to the United States. And the court set some interim dates to report to the court, okay, what are you doing to comply with our court order? And you know, when we are executing the criminal laws of our nation, the immigration laws of our nation, you know, it's kind of okay to go the extra due process mile, as is required under the law, to make sure that if we're going to deport somebody somewhere, we're not just a link in the chain that's going to get that person tortured or killed, right? Deport them, yes, but how about we not callously deport them to somewhere where they're obviously going to be in harm's way? You know, it's okay when we're executing the laws of our nation to show a little bit of humanity and empathy, you know, concern for our fellow human beings, even if they need to be deported from our country. We don't need to send them somewhere where they're going to be tortured or worse. You know, it's okay to act decently and responsibly with a little bit of kindness and concern for our fellow man and our fellow woman. You know? Because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.